Hey, thanks for the introduction, Pete. For those of you that are watching online, we've had a really rough weather day today, so we don't have a large audience. But for those that are watching online or watching in a video later down the road, I thank you for showing up. My name is Dale Carlson, and I have been invited by the Ann Arbor District Library to lecture to you today about Revolutionary War soldiers buried in the Southeast Michigan metropolis. Who knew that we had Revolutionary War soldiers buried here? I didn't before I set out on this project, and that is why I got so fascinated with it, because I was so surprised when I first found out there were some right near my house. So before I get going too far today, folks, I would like to thank Pete Pasquet. Did I get it right, Pete? And the Ann Arbor District Library for inviting me out. This is probably the 6th or 7th time I've lectured for the Ann Arbor District Library, so they're one of my best clients. Thank you. Also, I want to thank a guy named Michael McCaffrey, who happens to be the head of the Dearborn Heights Library and was super helpful when I was doing my research today, as well as 2 historians that work in Oakland County at the Oakland County Pioneer and Historical Society, Dave Decker and Barbara Fry, who really set me off in the right direction when I first started to look into Revolutionary War soldier history right here in our local area. So thanks a ton, Dave Decker and Barbara Fry of the Oakland County Pioneer and Historical Society. I am going to break down today's lecture into 4 sections today, folks. We're going to start off with a bio of myself and how I put out a few books and what I rest my expertise upon. We're going to look at different research resources that we can access when we endeavor to study Revolutionary War soldier history and burials in our area. We're going to do a very short review of American history between 1765 and 1826 to tell you the story of how Europeans started to settle southern Michigan en masse at a certain point in our nation's history. And then we'll get to the final spot, which is 21 soldiers of the American Revolution buried here in Metro Detroit, and that represents 2/7 of what I've hunted down so far. I'm at about 73, I think. And some of them are a little bit far out, like by Holly and Fenton, and so, you know, it's debatable whether they're metro area, but they're pretty close to the metro area. But anyway, I'm still shocked and surprised that I have found that many, and I love sharing this information for that reason. But I want to give you a little bit of an advance notice right here at this point. So I've given this lecture a few times, and I quiz my audience. Would you prefer I told you more about each individual soldier, or would you prefer I skip a lot of that information and try to get in as many soldiers as possible? And most of my audiences in the past have said get in as many soldiers as possible. So for a lot of these soldiers we're going to cover today, we're just going to talk about where they're buried, maybe what regiment they're in, maybe what state they're from, but we're not going to give a lot of the rest of their life history, because the lecture is really about teaching you where these are so that you can go see these places yourself. And I'd love your feedback today, too. There's probably some people out there that are like, I'd rather you got into deeper histories and did fewer soldiers. And if you feel that way, I want you to tell me about it after. So let's start off with a bio of myself and how I got to the point where I'm giving lectures at public libraries and writing books. Whoops, I went too far ahead. That was pictures for my best joke that I tell every time I lecture. My journey, it begins in the early 90s when I leave my boyhood home of Traverse City to attend school at Michigan State University in the early 90s. And back then, I had a lot more hair. There's my joke. So back then, one of my favorite things to do was drive to the city of Detroit pretty much every weekend to take in what was a super groundbreaking and exciting house and techno music scene. And as a bright-eyed youth visiting Detroit regularly, for the first time in my life, I was really struck by the size and scale of the structures I was seeing as compared to my modest boyhood home of Traverse City. And architectural history, it kind of became a hobby of mine for about 20 years. I started taking it a lot more seriously in the early 2010s when I met this guy online, Einar Ikevaran. He's Icelandic, and that accounts for his slightly uncommon name there. And Einar, he lived in the Detroit area in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. He's also an architectural historian. We met on an online architectural history forum, and we really hit it off, and we started a correspondence. After a few months of corresponding, Einar revealed to me that in the 1990s, he hunted down the son of a really well-known architectural sculptor by the name of Corrado Parducci, who worked in Detroit from 1924 to 1981. And Parducci's son allowed Einar to photocopy his father's original studio ledgers, as well as a scrapbook containing over 700 images of sculpture Parducci produced over the course of his career. Well, once I heard about the ledgers and the scrapbook, and that Einar was willing to share them with me, well, the gears of my mind began turning, and I decided that I wanted to write a book about Parducci. Nobody had ever written a book about him. It's a really super important person in the annals of Detroit architectural history, and I felt a responsibility to do something epic with the research materials that just fell in my lap. Took me about 7 years. I got this idea around 2013, finally got the book out in January of 2020. I immediately followed it up 5 months later with a second edition, and I'll probably put out a third edition in the future because I have found about 30 more Parduccis since I put the book out. Remember, there's 600 commissions listed in the ledgers. I've only found about 330 of them at this point. So there's always something new to discover with Parducci, and I promise you that I'm not at the end of the road with finding where his works are in the metro area and all over the United States, because we're all over the United States in this book. Well, it was such a fulfilling experience that I immediately followed it up with 2 books that I released at the beginning of 2020. One about Albert Kahn's extant structures in Southeast Detroit, one about stained glass in New Orleans. And it was really the experience of writing these books that taught me what it takes to be a really good architectural historian, and to some extent, just a regular old historian. And that is how I attained my expertise, and how I end up getting gigs like this now. And I try to get them as often as possible because I just absolutely love lecturing about this stuff. So let's move on to how I started studying Revolutionary War soldier burials. Because I'm giving lectures at public libraries, one of my better clients has been the Royal Oak Public Library. And a few years ago, they said to me, Dale, we want you to develop some lectures that are more custom to Royal Oak. And one of the first ideas I had was, how about I write a lecture about significant burials at the downtown cemeteries? Royal Oak has 3 cemeteries right in the heart of downtown. They're pretty historic. They agreed to my idea. And one of the first things I discovered when I started writing this lecture is that we've got 2 Revolutionary War soldiers buried right in downtown Royal Oak. First of all, we've got Sergeant Ezra Parker, who was from Wallingford, Connecticut. His grave has been marked by the Daughters of the American Revolution. And we also have Private Elijah Drake. And these guys both spawned families and have descendants that are buried right there next to them, but they're pretty much the oldest gravestones that we find at Royal Oak Township Cemetery. Actually, there's a couple that are a little bit older, but you know, they're right there in that group of the earliest pioneers in these areas. They really came out with their sons, which is what happened with most Revolutionary War soldiers. They're way past their war years when they get out this way, but we'll talk more about how that happened as we move forward. So anyway, I was so fascinated to find 2 right, about a half mile from where I live, that I immediately started thinking about, are there more in the Southeast Michigan area? And believe it or not, I'm up to over 70 now. So the first night I started studying it, I found 30 that night. And there's a reason I found a bunch real quick. We'll get to that in a second too. Actually, we'll get to it right now, because we're going to look at the kind of different research resources we can access when we want to learn more about Revolutionary War soldiers in general, especially ones that end up in the Detroit area. First of all, we have state historical markers. These are the green ones. These people that work for the state, they're pretty good historians that usually get their stuff correct. If you're a really serious historian, you will be able to find an error on a state historical marker once in a while. But it is pretty rare, and generally speaking, you can be sure that the history you read on a Michigan State historical marker has been vetted, and usually if a Revolutionary War soldier is buried in a cemetery, they get mentioned in the cemetery's historical marker. We also have non-state markers. This is what communities get when they don't want to sign into the covenant that the state kind of asks them to sign into about changes to the area around the historical marker. So if you don't want to get involved in that, you just put together your own group and make your own historical marker locally. These are put up by the Daughters This one's Daughters of the American Revolution. Actually, I'm not. This one I think is Sons of the American Revolution. But some pretty interested local Ann Arborites probably were involvement in the placement of these, because these are both at Forest Hill Cemetery. We're going to cover those soldiers in a little bit. So a lot of Revolutionary War soldiers, they get extra markers on their graves. And a lot of times those extra markers tell you more about their war service and where they're from. Here's one for a guy that actually participated in the Boston Tea Party. He's buried locally. We're going to cover him last because he's the most interesting in the metro area by a long shot, and you're going to find out why. So anyway, we can see a lot of extra information here about their war service. This is a guy named Hamtramck that the town is named for. We're going to learn a lot about him. If you see these little signs right here, it usually means that the extra marker is sponsored by the Daughters of the American Revolution, probably the most important organization for that kind of grave marking. We can also find private and public archives. And here's a really, really amazing one provided to me by the Dearborn Heights Public Library. The Dearborn Heights Public Library hires me all the time. They were really interested in this lecture because they have a Revolutionary War soldier buried right in Dearborn Heights, and they have a private archive they have built up at the library about this guy, and he's absolutely fascinating. They let me take the archive home with me. Said, bring it back the day you lecture. And I was just like, wow, that's awesome. So that's why Mike McCaffrey got a big thank you at the beginning of the lecture, because that shows a lot of trust, just letting a private citizen walk away with this archive that you've spent years building up. We can also go access U.S. government pension records. This is a lot easier in the modern age because of websites like Genealogy and, genealogy.com and, I can't remember what the other one's called, Heritage or something. But these images actually come from some Oakland County historians that back in the day went to Washington, D.C. to examine these before the age of digitization, where a lot of federal records are accessible online now. But they confirm, certain Michigan soldiers that came out on pensions. Ezra Parker, we just talked about him. He's in Royal Oak. Cornelius Post, I don't think we're going to cover him tonight, but he's another guy that's buried locally. I don't know a lot about using pension records. Barbara and Dave at the Oakland County Pioneer and Historical Society, they know a lot more about that than me, but I like to bring it up because it is accessible records that you can definitely figure out how to access on your own. I only know enough about them to bring them up here and tell you that they're a place that you can go look. A lot of Daughters of the American Revolution have websites. Some of them study their local patriots and put up histories about them. Some of them don't. The ones that do, it can be really helpful. Sometimes the histories are really slight. You don't learn a ton about them, but sometimes that's the only thing you can learn about these soldiers other than what you see on their grave markers and the historical markers at the cemeteries. So that can be a very valuable resource as well. Old history books. You can get this one online, History of Oakland County, Michigan, by a guy named Seeley. There's a chapter in it by a woman by the name of Lillian Drake Avery. Where do you think she got that Drake name from? One of her great-grandparents was the Drake, who's buried in the downtown Royal Oak Cemetery. She was really into history in the 1930s, and during that time, she hunted down as many Revolutionary War soldiers as she possibly could, buried in the metro area. She got up to about 30, and that's why I got up to 30 on my first night, because I found this book almost immediately, and we're gonna draw from it a lot, because the stories and the histories that she compiles, they're absolutely fascinating, and she's considered pretty much a pioneer in the study of Oakland County history, and is pretty much a legend in the Pontiac area. That's where their museum is. So Find a Grave. Once in a while, you get a very excited user of Find a Grave who wants to create a theme page, and Barbara Fry did that with Revolutionary War soldier burials in Oakland County, the woman that I told you about right at the beginning of the lecture. So there's other examples out there of Find a Grave pages that have been organized by a theme, and we can find other pages that center on Revolutionary War veterans of particular geographic areas. So there's another place you can start. A lot of times histories get posted there too, but you really got to vet those histories. If they're written by the contributor especially, sometimes they're just scanned from a book they've read though, and then you got to vet that book too, but that's usually probably going to be a little bit more legitimate and trustworthy. But not always. You get some really good historians on Find a Grave once in a while. So let's do just a little bit of history of the Revolutionary War, and we're going to cover some other American history after that so you understand the process by which Europeans started coming out here en masse. And we are going to start off with the Revolutionary War, which I am not going to go too deep into, except to say it was really complex. There were a lot of battles. It's marked in red here, this is like an offensive or a victory by the British. If it's marked in blue, it's an offensive or a victory by the Americans. And if it's marked in purple there, it's kind of a push. You know, Benedict Arnold's treason, for example, you know, a loss for the United States, but maybe a win for Britain. That's hard to gauge, but anyway, you get my point. So a lot of battles, very complex history. Probably the specific point I like to point out the most is that the fighting actually ends in October of 1781. The treaty doesn't get signed till almost 2 years later, and most historians say this is our end of the Revolutionary War, but there's not much happening in terms of battle between 1781 and 1783, at least not in the investigations I've done. But I'd like to reiterate, I am not a complete expert on the Revolutionary War. There are academics working at universities that know way more about it than me. My area of expertise is who participated in the Revolutionary War that is buried in our area. So let's look at some of the leaders on the American side: Peyton Randolph, John Hancock, Benjamin Franklin. On the British side, King George III, Lord Frederick North, Lord Shelburne. Interestingly, on the American side, we've got a couple guys that are kind of pirate-esque figures. Marquis de Lafayette and Rochambeau. Lafayette Street in downtown Detroit is named for this guy right here. And also, you'll notice that I have, Benedict Arnold. He's on both sides because there's different points in the war where he's fighting for, leading for different parties. So what happens after the Revolutionary War? Well, we have a constitutional convention in 1787. It produces a constitution that's ratified about a year later. Another year after that, we get our first president, George Washington, and during his presidency, the Bill of Rights is authored and ratified. At this point, there's no survey of our area of the United States that's been done by the federal government. In fact, we haven't even solidified our control of that territory, and that won't happen until about 1794, Battle of Fallen Timbers near Maumee, Ohio. But we get the Treaty of Detroit in 1807, and this is one of these treaties that's obviously very stilted towards the European settlers. And, you know, depending on your perspective, Indians agreed to leave the area, or they were kind of forced out. You know, there's a lot of room for historical debate there, but the Treaty of Detroit did result in far less Native Americans in this area, and that was something that European settlers thought that had to happen before they could feel safe settling in mass in a particular area. So the Treaty of Detroit definitely led to that happen. But more importantly, we have another war for independence with Britain. We've got to finish our war for independence. That gets done in 1815. That prevents any survey from being done around here up until that point. But we get our first federal land survey in 1815-16. Macomb County founded in 1818. Oakland County founded in 1820. Washtenaw in 1826. And the Erie Canal opens in 1825. These are the occurrences that really lead to a widespread immigration from the east to our area of people of European descent. So again, there are Europeans around here, fur traders. You know, there's a small settlement up by the Clinton River called Moravian Settlement. Rochester's a really old town too, but for the most part, inland settlements in Michigan before the 1820s, they're pretty darn rare. I'm sorry, inland settlements with European inhabitants. That's what I meant to say. There's plenty of Native American settlements. So anyway, now that we've taken a little bit of a look at the history and how soldiers got out here, I should probably also add that after the War of 1812, the United States government, they finally produced a pension system. And that allowed our Revolutionary War soldiers to apply for a pension, and sometimes free land was given out along with those pensions. And that's the reason that some of these people came out. Their sons wanted fresh farmland, and they brought out the whole family. And a lot of times they would get a free plot out here when they first moved out. But this is like really super pioneer era, and these are very very, very tough people, as we're going to find out here in just a second. So here's my map of Revolutionary War soldier burials in Metro Detroit. And again, there are some on the outskirts, you know, that, is it really in Metro Detroit? That one especially, probably not. Saline, is Saline in Metro Detroit? Maybe, maybe not. We're not going to cover the one in Saline because it's actually disputed. Actually makes for kind of an interesting case, but not as interesting a case as somebody who's definitely known to be there. But again, we can see we're all over the place in the metro area. And these are the counties that we're going to cover tonight. We're going to start with Macomb. We're just going to do one in Macomb. Macomb, I haven't found very many at all. And Macomb, it's the oldest of the counties that we're studying tonight. I believe there's a lot more in Macomb, but I have not met the right historian in Macomb yet to help me fill out that list. Once I find the right person or find the right research resource, I feel like my total is going to get over 100. We're then going to move on to Oakland County, where I'm going to cover a lot because I'm from Oakland County, and also Drake's research is some of the richest vein of this kind of information that we can find. So naturally, what she has done is going to get a lot of coverage. We'll head over to Wayne County, where we're going to find probably our most interesting burials in the area, especially this guy, Major Thompson Maxwell. We're going to finish up with him, actually, but we are going to do these guys, you know, fourth, third, and second to last, right here in Washtenaw County, because that's where I'm lecturing today, obviously. So let's get started on it. Oh, actually, let's look at the cemeteries we're going to visit. 1 cemetery in Macomb, 5 cemeteries in Oakland, 2 cemeteries in Washtenaw, and what do we got here? This is 2 cemeteries right here, but I got them right close together because one guy who was buried at the Vreeland family burial ground, he ended up getting moved later to Oakwood Cemetery, along with a bunch of his family members. He's a really super interesting case too. So let's start off with Macomb County, and we are arguably just a little bit outside of the metro area here at 26 Mile Road, up in an intersection that actually used to be called the town of Mead, which gives us the first part of our cemetery name, Mead Cemetery. The second part, though, Crawford Settlement Burying Ground, that is named for a guy by the name of John Crawford. And John Crawford is the Civil War veteran that we're talking about. So they've got a nice little historical marker there that gives quite a bit of information about him. Usually when you go up here, you're going to find his grave marker with a lot of additional markers. Sons of American Revolution, Daughters of American Revolution, couple American flags looking really great there. And we also get some information about his family. He spawned quite a family in this area, but this is an example where I was not able to unravel his family tree. These people are presumably descendants. They're all right near him, but sometimes you can use find a grave to figure out exactly who's the son, who's the daughter, who's the grandson. I wasn't able to do that in Crawford's case, but we'll talk about some others later in the lecture where I was able to do that. So here's this phantom ghost town of Mead that used to be up here at 26 Mile Road, and I can't remember the other road it intersects with, but kind of fascinating to find it, on a map there, and then drive up to that area and see that the only things that remain from Mead are probably a couple old barns. There's some newer structures, but they weren't built in the time when Mead was actually known as a town. Here's our historical marker and our grave marker again. Oh, I guess I put that in there twice. And we're going to move on. And again, I want to remind you that I'm not going to cover individual histories super closely, except for a couple people, because it allows me to get more soldiers in. I'm going to give you my email address at the end of the lecture, though. So if there's a particular soldier that you're very interested in here, you can email me personally, and I will give you the information, the photographs, the text that tell you more about the individual soldier. Let's move on to Oakland County now, and we are going to start off at Paint Creek Cemetery, which is another one that looks like it's just maybe a hair outside the actual metro area. But Paint Creek Cemetery is an especially unique case because we're going to cover a woman in this one. Her name is Lydia Barnes Parter, and obviously she did not fight in the Revolutionary War, but she did have a really important role, and this is one of the few histories for which I'm actually going to read a segment from Lillian Drake Avery's Histories. I got out there pretty late the night I visited this grave, so that's why my photos are so grainy, because I like to shoot with no flash, and It was, the sun was going down. It was the last minute, and if you just shoot at a high ISO, you get a lot of grain. You know that. So I still think grain can be a kind of cool, though, but not my best photos you're going to see today. But let's talk just a little bit about Lydia Barnes Potter. Her case for her involvement in the Revolutionary War is made primarily by an affidavit that she signs and tells a story along with, I want to say in the 1930s. It might say here, though. I can't remember if it says the date or not. But anyway, let's read it. To all whom it may concern, my grandfather, Lemuel Potter, was a Revolutionary War soldier. He enlisted at Hartford, Connecticut in 1777 when the Continental Army was organized. He had seen previous service in the militia companies. His offers were Colonel Willis and Captain Robert Warner. He was appointed a corporal, and with a corporal's guard was sent home to gather provisions and clothing for Washington's starving soldiers at Valley Forge. While engaged in this work, he met Lydia Barnes, a young woman who was devoting her whole time and strength to the service of her country by making clothing for the soldiers at the front. She spun and wove the wool and cut and made the garments, learning the tailor's trade that she might the more expeditiously supply the soldiers' needs. She worked so unremittingly in her task, standing continuously in a half-bent position over her cutting table, that she was never able to stand upright thereafter. When the young soldier Lemuel Potter returned to the front, he had won the promise of Lydia Barnes to be his wife when the war was over, but owing to a ruling of Congress that a married man could draw a year's rations, they were married earlier in February 2nd, 1779. And this is the historical case for Lydia Potter, which is probably not as carefully vetted as a history that we would try to develop today. But because the history occurs and the affidavit is 100 years closer to when the history actually occurred than we are now, generally speaking, Oakland County historians take Drake Avery's histories very seriously and consider most of them to be completely authenticated. I personally do myself, but in any attribution, scientific invention, building, artwork, every attribution is debatable. So there's always a room for a counterpoint in any case like this that you're making. Let's move on to our next example. And that is going to be at Mount Avon Cemetery in Rochester. And this is one of our best local cemeteries for Revolutionary War history, because we have 4 burials here. Graves dating as far back as 1817. And this is the first cemetery platted in Oakland County. Rochester is a very old city and is usually involved in any discussion of what is the oldest inland settlement continuously inhabited in Michigan with European settlers. I believe it's Rochester. There's some other historians that might debate that. Anyway, let's see who we have buried here. Private George Horton. He was in Captain Shoemaker's company, Colonel Chambers Regiment on the Pennsylvania line. He has a government marker, and this is an interesting distinction in our grave sites. Sometimes we get an original era grave site. That's the best proof. That really shows that they were buried here in the early 1800s. Sometimes the case is made posthumously, and if the case can convince the U.S. government that there's actually a soldier buried here by this name, the government will come in and put in their own grave marker. And that's what's happened with George Horton here. Original grave markers, obviously a little bit more interesting. We'll get to some of those in a second. Benjamin Loomis is a private. He's in the 5th Connecticut Regiment. He dies in 1835. Another historical case made after his death, he gets a government marker. We're not going to go all the way through Benjamin Grant Loomis's history here, but again, if you're intrigued and you're disappointed that I'm not reading this all off to you, you are going to write me a personal email after this lecture is over and ask me about it, and I'm going to hook you up. I'll give you my email address at the end of the lecture. Dr. Cyrus Chipman gets an original era grave marker as well as a government marker, and he's got his wife right there on the headstone too, which is really great. Cyrus Chipman, during his lifetime, served as postmaster for Rochester, and the post office was located in his home. Doesn't that sound fun? That sounds like a great job, doesn't it? Moving on, Private Nathaniel Baldwin, Connecticut Infantry, has a government marker and his own personal marker, and he passed away in 1840, and these guys are all pretty important pioneers in Rochester history, and if not themselves, because some of them, as soon as they got out here, They passed away. So a lot of times it's their sons, actually, that make the big influence in the pioneer years of these cities. Let's now move on to Oak Hill Cemetery in Pontiac, which is another one of the most interesting in Oakland County because there's 5 Revolutionary War soldiers buried here, believe it or not. And 2 of them are pretty much considered the founders of Oakland County, and 1 of them is considered the founder of the city of Pontiac. It's really very beautifully scenic. Also, I got this last fall, I believe. I got an even better fall shot coming up in a second. Their historical markers here at Oak Hill are super informative. We're not going to go over everything here, but just to remind you, this is a great place where you can get some of the most carefully vetted history about these sites and these burials. So here's Joseph Todd and his wife, Julia. They die in 1848 and 1843, respectively. And this is another soldier whose story is fascinating enough that I'm going to read a section of his history written by Lillian Drake Avery here for you. Although it was through the agency of Stephen Mack that Pontiac was located and settled, the first actual settlers were Joseph Todd and his son-in-law and their families. Todd was born at Warsaw, New York in 1765 and was a resident of that place when he enlisted for service in the Revolution in April 1781, served 10 months, 20 days as a private. His father also was Joseph Todd, who was a second lieutenant in the same company. In 1818, at the time he applied for a pension, he was a resident of Palmyra, New York, and it was in November of the same year that he journeyed to Michigan, taking 28 days to reach Detroit from Buffalo. Doesn't that sound like a pleasant trip? They were driven back to Erie 3 times by bad winds. From Detroit, they moved by wagons to Mount Clemens, and soon after, Mr. Todd and his party set out on an exploring tour in what is now Oakland County. It was now the middle of December, and the snow lay 10 or 12 inches deep. Each man carried a supply of provisions, a blanket, and an axe. 2 of them were armed with rifles. The first night's encampment was where the village of Romeo afterward grew up. They cleared away the snow and built a fire and then felled a hollow basswood tree, which they cut in 7-foot lengths and split open. Each man took half a log, placed it by the fire, and with his blanket snugly wrapped around him, lay down in the hollow and had a good night's sleep. Doesn't that sound like a great night's sleep to you guys, sleeping in a hollow log? It sounds like a Muddy Waters blues song. These are really super tough, pioneering people. But interestingly, they're not the first ones to get out there. Later in the passage, they reveal that they actually stay at some cabins that are already built. They don't reveal who owns those, though, but these are even more pioneering spirits than Joseph Todd and Stephen Mack. Stephen Mack, he ends up going on and founding the city of Pontiac. I believe that Mack Avenue in Detroit is named for him, but I have not been able to prove that yet. So don't quote me on that one, but I feel like I'm going to come across the proof when I put a little bit more effort into it. Mack, I'm not going to read you his whole history because a lot of it's similar to what you just heard with Todd. He was on that first exploratory party. And again, if you guys are really interested in learning more about his history, he's written about a lot because he founded Pontiac. So you can find your own history online, but you can also email if you want to be directed to where to find those excerpts from Drake Avery's book. Let's now move on to Union Corners in Troy. Troy was called Troy long before it was incorporated in the 1950s, and it's got a couple really old cemeteries that have a lot of Oakland County pioneers in them. This one's at 1199 East Square Lake, founded in 1831, and here we have Walter Blount from Norwich, Connecticut, who passed away in 1832 in Troy, Michigan. At the time they put the marker on his grave here, I strategically placed this photo to get a real nice fall shot there. At this time that this was placed, he had a descendant living in the local area. I'm not sure if they do anymore or if they're alive, but usually when you see a DAR marker, you know, the chapter, the full members of the chapter, usually most of them can trace their lineage to an actual Revolutionary War soldier. Crooks Road Cemetery, also in Troy. We've got 2 burials here. This cemetery is founded in 1850, and you remember I was saying earlier that it's usually the son that bears more influence in this generation because usually the Revolutionary War veteran is an old man by the time they get out here. Well, Private Samuel Niles, he was from Rhode Island. He had a wife named Smellage Sisson. I can't imagine why Smellage's name has fallen out of favor with the general public. Anyway, he came out with his son, and his son ended up being the founder of the settlement of Troy and was a farmer, postmaster, merchant, justice of the peace, member of the Michigan State Legislature, and a state senator from 1844 to 1845. So a lot of times in these particular situations, in this particular area, the son ends up being more influential than the father. But the father's era of influence was really important too. It was the Revolutionary War. So Niles, he spawned quite a family here that you can find his descendants here at the same cemetery. His great-grandson, George H., great-granddaughter, Roby V., granddaughter-in-law, Laura E., and then right in the same cemetery, but not near him, a different section of the cemetery, we've got a guy by the name of Silas Sprague, also an Ezra Parker marker. So you can see Ezra Parker chapter has been super active in our area for probably a century at this point. Silas Sprague's got another great story that is told in Lillian Drake Avery's history in the Seeley book. We're not going to go all the way through it, but one thing that is great that Silas Sprague did is he spawned a huge family, and almost his entire family is buried here. We've got Orrin, a son, Orrin, a grandson, Maria Guster. I couldn't figure out what her relationship was. Another son, a daughter-in-law, third wife, Eunice, and a grandson, Daniel. So really sweet to see what a long line he spawned in our area. Can't tell you if any descendants are still living in our area, but wouldn't be surprised to find out. Let's now move on to Wayne County, and we're going to start off at Veterans Park in Hamtramck. Who knew that Hamtramck was named for a Revolutionary War veteran? Anybody? Anybody? Nope. He's a really important one, too. In fact, some people say he's the most important Revolutionary War era soldier that is basically unknown to the American public. He's not unknown to us, though, because we all know the name of Hamtramck. If you live around here, that name sticks in your head. You don't forget it after the first time you heard it. Poor Jean Francois Hamtramck from Montreal, he's had his body moved 3 times since he died. This is his fourth burial here. Excuse me, so sorry. I get a kick out of it, but it's actually kind of morbid because, I mean, the last few transfers, there's no body. There's just a pile of bones, and sometimes those bones have turned to dust. So you really wonder what they're transferring at that point when it happens. We'll come across another story like that in a second. So again, native of Canada, Hamtramck, he knew George Washington personally. He was commended by Washington a couple times over the course of his career. There's a ton of great extra information and actually talks about his relationship with Washington on the headstone there. Not going to read it all to you. But again, suffice to say, Hamtramck, a high-ranking, a colonel whose name is really not that well-known to Americans of the time, and he's a guy that assisted Major General Anthony Wayne when it came to signing Jay's Treaty, which is a really important treaty that happened after the Battle of Fallen Timbers that we talked about just a second ago. This is not a picture of Hamtramck. People don't know what he looks like. He wasn't important enough to get a painting. This is somebody's approximation years later. I believe you find this inside the Waterboard building in Detroit. And we have a large excerpt from a book here by Greg Kowalski. It's about the history of Hamtramck. So again, if you want to learn more here, I can't read all this to you. The lecture will be 2 hours, folks. We don't want to do that. Jot down the publishing company and the title there, or again, write me and I'll share this excerpt with you. Hamtramck, buried 4 times. First time he dies, he gets buried at Old St. Anne's graveyard. They decide they want to build something on that site in the early 1800s. They move all the bodies. They go to the new St. Anne's Church Cemetery. His body hangs out there for about 60 years. He gets moved to the Mount Elliott Cemetery. And then after 100 more years, come on, what's really left? I don't know, maybe some bones, but he gets moved to Veterans Park in '62, a park that's constructed in the '50s, and that's where he is today. So next time you're on, Kniff in Hamtramck, just take a really quick stop by because there's some really interesting historical markers there about the Dodge brothers too, because Dodge, Maine, their big plant was in Hamtramck for probably about 80 years. Elmwood Cemetery. This is Detroit's probably prettiest and most historic cemetery. There is some competition for most historic, but those other two, they can't compete with it for beauty because none of the hills got flattened here and the river didn't get filled in. The architect, Gordon Lloyd, I like to bring him up. If there's ever architectural history that I get to cover at the same site as an important, a burial, I usually like to cover that because my real specialty is architectural history, and Lloyd is really important. I think I threw a few examples in here for you in a second. He's got a few in Ann Arbor. He's born in England in 1832, raised in Canada, trained in Canada by his uncle, and he comes back to the United States after his training, comes to Detroit in 1858, has a pretty stellar career, has got a lot of standing buildings throughout Michigan, mostly Episcopal churches. And he decides to take a cruise to the South Seas in 1904. Dies the day before he's supposed to get on the boat. Poor guy. The article suggests that this is the first time he's ever taken a cruise in his life. But anyway, got to see San Francisco first, hopefully. Here's just a few examples of his stuff. Here in Ann Arbor, we've got the St. Andrew's Episcopal, 306 North Division, right there at Kingsley. Christ Church downtown. This one's in my hometown. And it was falling apart when I was growing up there, but it's been completely renovated since, and it's probably my favorite Gordon Lloyd commission because of that. If you've ever eaten at the Whitney in Detroit, he also designed that building. So let's move on to Elmwood Cemetery, our site for our next few burials. And they're not the only famous burials here. Coleman Young's here, Lewis Cass, the original governor of the Michigan Territory, founder of Stroh's Beer, Bernard Stroh, mother Charlotta Waddles. She was a very famous figure in philanthropy and charity in Detroit for many years. Dr. Charles H. Wright was the first African-American OBGYN in America. And we got a couple gold medal winners as well. Let's look at our burials, though. And this is definitely one of the most interesting ones you're going to see. Look at, born 1753, died 1868. It's a government marker. So the government had to be sold on this case. When I hear about somebody who's lived to 115, my skepticism meter goes off instantly. But James Robinson, he's had a history compiled by the official historian here at Elmwood, a person who has produced a bunch of other histories that I know to be accurate. So this really supports the case here. But again, I do get a little bit skeptical by historical figures that brag of an age this long. And also there's a gap in the history of his life, which also makes me a little bit skeptical. But I don't want to talk too much about my skepticism, because his story is amazing. So let's, I'm gonna read some of this one to you because it's just fascinating. James Robinson was born enslaved in 1753 in Maryland. Robinson's owner, Colonel Francis de Shields, was an officer in Washington's army during the American Revolutionary War. Private Robinson was with de Shields throughout the war. Private Robinson was at the Battle of Whitehaven, Roanoke River, Ragged Point on Dorset County River, Vienna Ferry, Cambridge, and Yorktown. At Yorktown, Robinson charged a British rampart, killed a number of the enemy, and helped secure it. Lord Cornwallis surrendered, and General Marquis de Lafayette decorated Private Robinson for valor. That's huge. Following the war, Robinson moved to Philadelphia with de Shields. Robinson's obituary indicates that de Shields stipulated in his will that Robinson be granted his freedom. However, de Shields' sons took Robinson to Louisiana and sold him into slavery to Calvin Smith, a Louisiana cotton planter, for $1,500. Amazingly, Robinson signs up to serve in the War of 1812 after being sold back into slavery. So that is just an amazing display of patriotism that should be noted. He volunteered to fight in the War of 1812. He fought bravely and was wounded in battle in New Orleans. Destined to return to slavery, some unidentified white men in the North who sympathized with the brave old slave secured his freedom and sent him to Cincinnati, Ohio, where for the first time in his life he breathed the pure air of freedom. At the age of 70, Robinson was licensed to preach in the anti-slavery West Wesleyan Methodist Church. Records are not clear on when Robinson came to Detroit, nor when he became a minister. Robinson died at the age of 115 and is the oldest person buried at Elmwood. So again, a fascinating story, and is vetted by the Elmwood Cemetery historian, so I tend to believe it, even though, again, when somebody tells me about a 150-year-old, a 15-year-old, I start wondering if it's really true or not. So let's move on to James Witherell, another government marker here, but also his original family monument. Got a great fall day last year to make this photograph. If you know Detroit geography, you know that there's a Witherell Street in Detroit, probably named after this guy. Haven't been able to prove that one yet. James Witherell had a really important history in that he was a Supreme Court justice in the years that Michigan was a territory, and that's why we have a transcribed history here that's posted on the Michigan Supreme Court Historical Society. He was elected to Congress in 1807. He voted for an act that abolished the slave trade. He resigned his seat to accept that appointment as Supreme Court of the territory of Michigan by Thomas Jefferson. So just unbelievably important early pioneer Detroiter. And here's another one, John Trumbull. You guys know the street Trumbull, where Tiger Stadium used to be, right at the corner of Michigan? That street is named for Trumbull. And then he's buried at the family plot of Woodbridge. You know the neighborhood Woodbridge in Detroit? That neighborhood name is named for this Woodbridge guy. Trumbull, he also gets a government marker, and his inscribed tombstone there is a little bit half buried, so I was only able to get a portion of it there. And again, he's buried next to the Woodbridge family, which is the namesake of the Woodbridge neighborhood in Detroit. And Trumbull, he's another guy like Witherell whose early history goes back to the East Coast, and he knew some really important people on the East Coast. He actually worked with John Adams on quite a few law, things, I can't remember, cases, that's the right word for it. And he works with Adams enough that he is cited in the legal papers of John Adams that are published into a book after years after John Adams died, and this was handwritten stuff that, was all concisely annotated and organized by later archivists. But anyway, very, very clear proof that he worked with John Adams, which makes him super duper important. He also wrote an epic poem about the Revolutionary War that some people call Mick-Fingal, some people call it Mufingal, and just put the apostrophe there. And this is kind of like a shortened Iliad or Odyssey that concentrates on American heroic acts in the Revolutionary War. So at one time it was a more standard reading than it is now, but a pretty famous epic poem in his day. So let's now move to the Vreeland family burying grounds, and you can see we're way on the south end of the metro area here in a town called Flat Rock. Flat Rock has two cemeteries that have Revolutionary War soldier remains, but they're the same family. So I'll tell you about how that story happened here in a second. First of all, to get to the cemetery, you have to get out of your car and take a walk through a park. This is the Vreeland family burial ground that is not very well taken care of, unfortunately. In fact, the vandalism on its sign gives you an indication of how well taken care of it is. Some of these, they get moved in 1888 to Oakwood Cemetery, about a mile down the road. So if you see a asterisk, like next to Jacob or next to, there's another one on there. It's Michael, next to Michael. Next to Elias, that means they got moved to the other cemetery. We'll go to that other cemetery in just a second. But first, let's look at the shape that Vreeland family burial ground is in. Not great. Could be worse, though. The city could have just decided, let's just get rid of it. Let's, move the remains, get rid of these headstones, and do something else with this land. So it's actually a good thing that the cemetery is still here, and these headstones here, and this history is still here, because this is salvageable. There's a lot of people in the United States that go around to different cemeteries trying to repair headstones. Hopefully one of them gets their eye on the Vreeland burial ground at some point, because there's a lot of toppled stuff here. This is Elias, Michael's son, and then in the previous page we had a couple different, Garrett, that's another son, and there's a section, I believe this is Michael's original headstone, but he gets a new headstone when they move the family to another cemetery down the road. We'll get to that in a second. Yeah, this is an unknown Michael Vreeland. Looks like they died at 9. That was probably a son. Garrett again, and Jacob. Oh, yeah, there's a few that I couldn't. This is Michael's. I moved his headstone around to give you guys an idea exactly how it's broken. This is a very, very easily repairable headstone, and I really hope somebody gets to it at some point. Because Michael Vreeland and his family, they are super important. Him and his sons are the founders of Flat Rock. And there's just lots of things down there with their name on it. And at the time I wrote this lecture, which was just about a year ago, maybe 2 years ago, they were still reporting that Vreeland descendants still lived in the Flat Rock area, which is fantastic. How important was Vreeland? Well, when he dies in 1841, he gets an obituary in a New York newspaper. That's almost unheard of for somebody that moves out to, Michigan, 60 years after the Revolutionary War. So we know that he's got a very high stature to the point that people in New York are still talking about him in the 1840s. Well, again, let's look at what happened to his gravesite. Got married, got moved just about a mile down the road. They were outside of the Flat Rock city limits here. I believe we're in Huron Township. Give me 1 second. Cool, it looks like this is gonna work. So here at Oakwood, this is a fascinating case because this right here, this is our cemetery entrance. And they hardly ever open those fences. They're almost always locked. But it's just a little fence there. All you got to do is walk around the edge, and it's actually a public cemetery back there, as we can see from this aerial shot. Here's our driveway. If you drive back, you can't drive back there because the fence is almost always closed, but you can walk back there. It's legal and public, but you're basically in these people's backyard. And it's very isolated, and you'll hardly ever see anybody back there because the entrance is so cut off. But again, you are welcome to visit personally. Nobody's gonna look at funny or act like it's weird that you're back there. Big, huge Vreeland family plot here, and there's Michael Vreeland's second headstone. He gets a DAR marker, an SAR marker, another historical marker there in the background, so we can very easily see how important the Vreeland family history is to the Flat Rock community. Interestingly, I ran into 3 different spellings of his last name over the course of my research. I'm convinced they're all the same guy. One was Freeland with an F, one's Vreeland with a V, and then we get a Vreelant right here on this marker. That could be just an error, but it's not uncommon to find multiple name spellings over the course of different newspapers and markers at this point in American history. Here's another son here that I think his original burial was actually at the cemetery. He's not one of the ones that got moved. All right, let's move out to Clarenceville Cemetery in Livonia now. And at Clarenceville, this is one of the cemeteries I couldn't figure out when it was founded. Can't always do that. Usually you can. One thing that's really cool about this discovery, Private Benjamin Walker Grace's family tombstone, their family stele there, or obelisk, whatever you want to call it, is that it got a marker on it after I made these photographs. Like I went to do some research on Find a Grave just a few weeks later and found out that some locals had gotten a really nice marker that had extra information. This is what I learned about him after because he had hardly any historical information written about him that I could find online. So Private Benjamin Walker Grace, let's see here. He was a private from Wilmington, Massachusetts. Oh, they don't really talk much about his actual service. Every once in a while, you run into that. A soldier who it's confirmed that he served, but there's not necessarily a record of what regiment he was in or what he actually did during the war. Crawford, that we started out with, he's the exact same way. Everybody reports him as a Revolutionary War veteran, but nobody can actually produce any information about what his rank was, what state he served for, what regiment he was in. But not a big deal. I mean, the degree of amount of history we get per person, there's a wide spectrum in all kinds of different studies. Walker, he also produced a family in the area, Amasa son, Jane granddaughter. And now let's move on to Washtenaw County. Ooh, I might go over a few minutes, Pete. I hope that's not too big of a deal. I think I have 3 to go, but I'll try to race through them real quick. This happened last time when I was doing intersections. So have any of you guys know about Terhune Park? This is in the neighborhood down by, you know where Yost is? You know, up by, what do they call it? That little village back there when you take a right on Yost and go into the neighborhood. This is a little park on a corner of Terhune in that neighborhood. And Terhune, you guys might know that there's a street out on the east side of town out by what used to be farmland named Terhune. So that was the street I was telling you about earlier. So this is actually a case where the headstones got moved, but the remains did not. This used to be in a cemetery that was at Platt and Packard, but it was starting to get run down and not paid attention to. And at a certain point in the 20th century, early 20th century, they moved the headstones, but they didn't remove the remains because they were too far gone. You can read all about that in the historical markers here. This is posted by the Sarah Caswell Angel chapter of the Daughters of the American Revolution, and they give some pretty great history about this person. I'm not going to go all the way through it because we're in a rush and we want to finish up here. Forest Hill Cemetery, we've got 2 burials here. I want to mention Gordon W. Lloyd again. He designed the sexton's residence and the offices here. The cemetery is founded in 1859, and he designs those buildings in the 1880s. This part in the middle, that's done most likely by some local masons and not by Lloyd, but that is a disputed section. This right here and this right here, those are Lloyd designs. So again, really important architect to Ann Arbor almost as much as Detroit. Benjamin Woodruff, he is a drummer, which we don't get very many of those reports. And they used to send a drummer out with the corps when they were getting ready to go into battle, which seems absolutely foreign to us today, but it was a common thing back then. He was on the New Jersey line, and he passed away in our area in 1837. Got a great historical marker there about him, as well as Hosea Cutler, who passed away in 1840, served in a few different regiments for Massachusetts, and also has a great group of markers there at Forest Hill and a nice historical marker. And again, I'm not sure what agency put those up, but somebody located in Washtenaw County, I'd almost guarantee it. All right, this is my last one today, folks, and I think it's the most interesting burial in the Metro Detroit area. It's at Wallaceville Cemetery in Dearborn Heights. This is a cemetery that, much like Vreeland Family Burial Ground, it's not taken as good a care of as it should be. In fact, the city leaves this cemetery locked up, I want to say 28 out of 30 days a month. They open it up a couple weekend Saturdays a month. So you got to organize to get there. But Mike McCaffrey, who loaned me the database about the guy we're going to talk about, he actually has keys, so he got me in here at a time, it wasn't one of their regular openings. There's also a really, really old schoolhouse here from 1824, which is going back really, really far for this area. So Thompson Maxwell, a major, he served in the served during the time of the Boston Tea Party. The legend, and there's not a lot of written records about this, but the legend says that he was a getaway driver, and he never actually got on the boat. But still, enough involvement that he gets this marker on his gravesite. Let's pay attention to this black and white one right here, because interestingly, when I was doing my research in the archive that they loaned me, I found a receipt for that marker, which is really great. That one was put up in 1969. There's also a record of some Detroit librarians doing some research to prove Wallace's burial site. And here is a really interesting piece. This is a transcription of Major Thompson Maxwell's petition for a pension in the, I can't remember what the date is on it. We're going to read it, though, because it's absolutely fascinating. We're going to finish off by reading it. There's that receipt I was telling you about. Paid $65 for that puppy in 1969. Probably cost about $500 these days, just an estimate, but I do a little bit of this kind of work with the Berkeley Historical Committee. And here's the Detroit Public Library research again, just a little bit more of a close-up there. And here is Major Thompson Maxwell's handwritten a pension petition, and they have a photocopy of it. Somebody in Dearborn Heights history went to D.C. and actually got a photocopy of this for their database, as well as the certificate that approves this pension, signed by Secretary of War James C. Calhoun, 7th President of the United States. Again, just a photocopy, but just an amazing document to find in this archive that they just loaned me and let me take home for the purposes of creating this lecture. So I'm going to read most of this statement to you, and what I want you to really pay the closest attention to is Thompson Maxwell's age in the late part of his life when he's still fighting in wars for the United States. I, Thompson Maxwell, declare and state that I was born in Bedford in the state of Massachusetts on the 11th day of September, 1742, am 76 years of age. That's when he wrote it, wait a second. 1742 plus 76. That's the year he's writing it in. I can't do that math in my head real quick. But anyway, he's born in 1742, 76 years of age, and a resident citizen of the United States. In the month of March 1757, I enlisted into and served in the company of Rangers belonging to a corps commanded by Major Rogers and Major Putnam. Was in the Battle of Fort Anne in the state of New York, where Major Putnam was taken prisoner by the French and Indians and tied to a tree between the contending parties for some hours in the year of 1758. I was in the battle in the attack on Ticonderoga under General Abercrombie. In the succeeding year, I was at the taking of Ticonderoga and Crown Point from the French in the year 1760. I was in the battle at the taking of Isle-en-Noye. I was in the battle near Chambless, I don't know how to pronounce that one, in the year 1761. I marched to Detroit in a company commanded by the then captain, now General John Stark, where I remained in service until the year 1763, when I was in the Battle of Bloody Ridge against the Indians. This is more commonly known locally as the Battle of Bloody Run, an unbelievably important battle that has a historical marker at the Players on East Jefferson in Detroit. Let me find my place here, against the Indians in the year 1775. And let's keep in mind that he starts fighting in 1757, so we're already 28 years, is that right? No, 18 years into his fighting career. On the 19th of April, I was in the Battle of Lexington near Boston. Whoops. Oh, we're gonna have to clean that up, Pete. I'm really sorry, man. We'll get it in a second here. What a climactic ending to my lecture. I entered as a lieutenant in a company commanded by Captain Isaiah Crosby. I was in the Battle of Bunker Hill on the 17th of June, 1775. Just an unbelievably important battle. In the year 1776, I entered as a lieutenant in a regiment commanded by Colonel James Reed in the company commanded by then Captain, now Major General James Wilkinson. I was in the battle in Canada. I was in the Battle of Trenton on the 2nd day of January the 1st. I was in the Battle of Princeton. I missed one there. I was in the Battle of Three Rivers. I was in the battle at Bound Brook and at Raritan Bridge. In the same year, the Battle of Hubbardston in Vermont under Colonel Warner. In August, I was in the Battle of Beamington, where I was wounded. I was in the Battle of Bemis Heights, another really important one, on the 19th. I was in the Battle of Saratoga on the 17th of October. This is just unbelievable, his war history here. But what's crazy is that we really haven't gotten to the end of it yet. After the surrender of General Burgoyne's army, I trained a company of Rangers and marched to the frontier of the state of New York, in which I served. In service, I continued to the year 1779. This is the Sullivan Expedition, which is basically a massive extermination of Native Americans in Upper New York. It's actually quite a dark chapter in American history, but at this point in the American history, people that participated in it at that time were considered heroes. We have a little bit more nuanced view of it now, but still spectacular that Thompson Maxwell's still out there serving for the United States military. He was in a battle of a place called Hog's Back. Okay, now we're gonna jump ahead to the War of 1812. So how old is Maxwell at this point? He's 70. In the year of 1812, I joined the Army under the command of General Hall and marched to Detroit. I was in the battle at Brownstown under the command of Colonel James Hill. And on the 16th of August of the same year, I became a prisoner by the surrender of Detroit to the British in 1813. I joined the Army under the command of General Wilkinson at Fort George. I was in the battle at Lacaille Hills, after which I joined the Army at Chipuna and was in the Battle of Lundy's Lane under the immediate command of Colonel James Hiller. So I'm not going to go on any further because I think that you should be amazed enough by this point, and I'm short at time, that this guy is still out there fighting in his 70th year, and he goes on a couple more years, and he finishes it off by explaining, you know, this is my petition for a pension, and that my commission documents from back in the day, you know, they've been lost in fires. All I have is my, you know, signed affidavit. And this is, again, history that it's pretty well accepted by locals as accurate. And I just think that General Thompson Maxwell's story is so fascinating that I love to finish my lecture with it. And that does, oh, wait, no, it doesn't conclude my lecture. Mike McCaffrey, the guy I've been telling you about the whole time, who gave me that archive, he is the one that put together the program to get this local historical marker posted just last year at Wallaceville Cemetery. So really, really great guy that cares a lot about local history. Thank you again, Mike McCaffrey. That does conclude my lecture, folks. I hope you've enjoyed what you've learned today. Looks like I only went over by a 5 minutes. After maybe a couple claps, I'd love to take any questions any of you have. Thanks, you guys. Thank you, our audience of 4 today. Again, it was really bad weather, folks, so I completely understand. Anybody with any questions? All right.
You said you're at like 71 right now total in the area, correct?
That's right, yep.
Where do you think you're going to go next to find more?
Macomb, definitely, because I don't know, maybe you were thinking about something else, but I did mention earlier in the lecture that I have not yet met a historian or found a resource that covers Macomb's a Revolutionary War soldier burials thoroughly. But Macomb is the oldest of the counties out here, and it's the oldest county to have inland settlements. There was a settlement called Moravian settlement in the 1700s. It was a mix of Moravians and Native Americans. So the history's there. It's just a matter of where it's hiding. And sometimes when you're a historian, the resource that ends up being your number one thing that you base a whole lecture on, you don't find it the first day you go looking for it. Sometimes you got to do some serious digging. But because Macomb County is founded in 1818 and it's got so many more old settlements than other parts of Michigan, except for Detroit, I'm convinced that there's probably 20 to 30 there and that I'll get over 100. That's my next spot to invest my most effort, without a doubt. Anybody else? Thanks for coming today, you guys. Hopefully we draw a bigger crowd next time. I'm sure it's going to be a nicer day.